Happy International Women's Day, all of you. I'm very, very pleased. Thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here today. So my name is Almudena Sevilla. I'm a professor of economics and public policy in the social policy department, and I'm also the co-director of the Women in Social and Public Policy Research Hub. And today we're launching this hub. We have a great set of speakers today from both academia and business. And we're going to be discussing how business and academia can work together to bring about positive change in diversity and inclusion. So we have Professor Naila Kabir from LSE. We have Emma Codd from Deloitte. We have Johanna Rickne from Stockholm University. We have Paola Profeta from Bocconi. And last but not least, Begoña Ramos from KPMG. They've all worked on gender, and I'm sure it's gonna be really interesting. So a big applause, and let's start.
Okay, so let me just get my. So I'm very pleased to be here because I mainly work in South Asia. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from people who don't work there and work in contexts that are very different. So I'm going to start with a general question to all of you. And let me start with you, Paola. And the question is, what? It's not a little question. What are the key unresolved challenges of the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions? And you've got about 5 minutes each. No pressure.
Okay, I can start. Can you hear me? So just to give you a little bit of background, because I'm going to talk a lot about sustainability and climate change. I work in KPMG, and I'm a partner there, and what I do is advise financial services on how they have to tackle climate change, how can they bring innovation to, obviously, their business models, and also how can they be more sustainable. So that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But in order to answer your question, I think the most important challenge is access to capital. We know that women over the world, they are lacking on both the opportunities and also the ability to get access to capital. Therefore, they are not able to innovate. Therefore, they're not able to build a business and also cater for their family. So one of the things that I think as a society we need to think is how do we allow for that access to capital to be flowing more women, and so that we have a more equal world. But I will open it to my colleagues here so that they're far more knowledgeable than me on women economics and all of these unresolved challenges.
Thank you very much. That was very timely. Would you like to go next?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, I think it works. Yes.
I think so.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so first of all, of course, this is a big question. I mean, because underrepresentation of women in leadership position happens both in the business world, so in firms, and in the labor market, and also in politics. Okay, so I have done a lot of research in both aspects, and many things are somehow related. So what I will put as the main ingredients or the main obstacles, let's say the main unresolved challenges, are valid for both contexts, like the business world, the business community, or the business world, the firms, but also the underrepresentation of women in politics. And unfortunately, there is not just one simple element or one simple obstacle, so that we go there, we fix the problem, and that's it. It's very complex. And this is also why things and all the type of interventions that we have done in the past years, because things have changed, so we have made some progress, but still we need to talk and we need to understand. So the main unresolved problems, let's say, I mean, the common root is that there is still a culture which is not open to equality, not egalitarian, and we now know that this can also be measured, and we have done this type of research. We can call it culture, we can call it prejudice, we can call it stereotypes, but those things are explicit because people many times they just simply say that they are not in favor of having women leaders, etc. There is, for example, a famous question in the World Value Survey where they ask people around the world, like, men are better leaders than women. They ask this like better business leaders or also better political leaders. And the answer, I mean, of course, it's unfortunately many people agree with this. No, even 15, 20% of the population agree, depending on the country, but they generally agree with this type of question. So there is, thus we call it explicit stereotype or culture. There is also something more unknown, more implicit, more unconscious bias, etc., that we all know around. But this is very important because we have also seen that it's going to determine the outcome. It's going to determine the hiring process, the promotion process, the presence of women in leadership position really depends a lot on what happens in terms of culture. And this culture, unfortunately, is not only among, let's say, citizens or voters or like common people, but also at the managerial level. So people who have to take this decision in terms of leadership, or at the party level. So people, I mean, parties also act as gatekeepers for women many times in terms of political representation. So I think this is a crucial aspect. Then we have many other things because, for example, many unresolved challenges have to do with measures, best practices, or policy interventions, especially when we talk about political underrepresentation. It is true that we know that there are tools or there are measures that may support the presence of women in leadership position. I have worked, for example, but Johanna also, we have worked a lot with the quota system, with the gender quotas, and of course this is a kind of controversial measure. Of course, people in the ideal world, nobody likes, but in the real world, they are necessary. Many times quotas have been necessary to break the glass ceiling, because we are talking about this. So and so probably one of the little, I mean, they are effective. Not the ideal solution and not solving everything, because we know that the leadership has to be built from the bottom to the top. While of course with the quota you go from the top to the bottom. So we need measures on both sides. But this is also why many times we cannot solve the problem, because we have not put the system, the measures, or the interventions that are effective enough to do it.
Thank you. And you've just outlined the complexity of the problem.
Yes.
Emma?
I don't know quite how to work. Oh, okay. Is that on? Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to have to lean forward a bit. So actually everything that Paola said, I agree with. I would say, look, I was thinking about this. You know, what are the challenges? Look, we have been focusing on gender equality at work for how long? For so many years. Has much changed? In reality, sadly, I don't think it has. So I think there are some things that have made a difference. You know, Hampton-Alexander, you know, targets, but you then look at that and you look in reality, FTSE 250, women in executive roles, what is it, 45 now? Hold executive roles. So effectively, what have we done? We've created, I think, quite a lot of serial non-exec directors who are filling roles. Now that's great, and you know, it's really important that you know, that we have non-exec directors. We have great non-exec directors, but I would say, you know, that's the progress has been glacially slow as well. In terms of the challenges, okay, so bias, I absolutely agree. If you think about who runs the majority of I'm coming at this from the corporate world, which is really all I know. Who runs the majority of the corporate world today? It's certainly, unfortunately, it's not women. Okay, so who's making the decisions? So when we have a panel, so for some reason, businesses still love panels when they want to promote anybody. What do? Put a woman in the room and eight men. That's the reality of. So I think that is still a real challenge. Inequity in the systems. We've still got systems, many systems that have been in place for 75 years, 100 years, that just haven't changed, primarily designed by men. This is not an anti-man rant, by the way. I want to be really clear about that. But there is a difference in terms of the way that thought processes. Now, just a couple of other things. Culture, I absolutely agree, and I think that is really critical. And culture within organisations, what I describe as the everyday culture. Still, so many organisations have yet to address that. So what they've done is they've got women's networks, they've got loads of programs that let's give women more confidence, let's do this, let's do that. What they have not done is fix the one critical thing that you need, which is the culture, an inclusive culture. Just very quickly, I want to throw some stats, which is why I have my notes with you. So every year we do this amazing piece of research. We're about to publish our third year, I think next month in April. 2022, so April 22, 5,000 women in the workplace across 10 countries, okay, at all levels in the workplace. And we asked them the true story. We asked them how they're really feeling. Where are you at the moment? How do you feel? So let me tell you, in April 22, how 5,000 women felt around the world. This is women in the corporate world. Burnout, half of them felt burnt out. Half of them felt stressed and said their stress was up and up every year. Half of them said their mental health was poor. Half of them said they always felt the need to always be on. And the reason they felt that was they thought they were going to miss out opportunities or they'd be penalised. Only half were planning to stay for more than 2 years. When you look 5 years down the road, only 10% were still going to be there with their employers. Flexible working, 94% said, I'm not going to ask for it because it'll impact my career progression. 90% said, if I reduce my hours, guess what? My workload's not going to reduce. And then finally, the great, wonderful hybrid working that we've all started to embrace, not working. 60% of women said they're being excluded through hybrid working. And finally, non-inclusive behaviours. 60% of those women said that they in the last year have experienced either microaggressions or harassment in a workplace context. So for a modernised workplace where we have allegedly been fighting for gender equality for many years, it doesn't bode very well. I have high hopes for the future, but at the moment there are multiple challenges that exist, sadly, and they need bold, brave solutions, which we're not taking at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. It's rather a challenge, isn't it? Johanna.
Hello. Okay, let's see. Can you? Okay. Yeah, so thanks for all the great points so far. So when I was thinking about these unresolved issues for women's leadership, I wrote down 3 things. Okay, first, I think like dating and love is like a huge problem. Women are taught by culture, again, to marry up. Like we need to find a man who is successful, maybe older than us, maybe makes more money than us, etc. Men have a culture of marrying down, so to speak, someone younger, blah, blah, blah. This means that in most relationships, there's a built-in inequality from the start. And this gives men a lot of career support because they have the so-called ground service that we talk about like in Swedish for their career. Women is catering to their needs for their career. And for women, it's very unusual to have like a stay-at-home husband that you maybe need to really get to the top leadership positions. So that, I think, those like behaviors and norms around couple formation and love, of course, doesn't happen randomly. There's a very specific pattern to how that happens in society that I think is problematic.
You still get married.
No. Okay. Second, I agree with this work environment issue of how we treat each other at work. I think it's very important. When you have a career, there are lots of interactions involved. First, you start interacting with your colleagues, you interact with your superiors, and then as you climb, you interact with your subordinates. And there are two components of those interactions that I think research is pointing to as problematic for women, one being incivility, and the other being sexual harassment. Incivility is things like being ignored, you say something and people just don't respond positively. You are collaborating in a group and your contribution is just not as valued. You're not given like the good tasks to develop your skills. That type of incivility is very important. And sexual harassment, which I've worked on personally, is another aspect of the work environment that really harms women. Both these things happen much more in male-dominated sectors, which is where like the most prestigious positions are in the economy. Third, I would like to quickly mention policy. Of course, this is a policy seminar. So in Sweden, we have what we think of as like the trifecta of policies that made our labor market so gender equal. The first one is childcare and elderly care, low cost and universal, to reduce some of the household work. Like if we can't divide it more equally or have stay-at-home husbands, maybe we can at least move it out of the household so that women don't have as much of it. So low-cost childcare and elderly care is very important. Second, generous parental leave, which is linked to labor market attachment, pre-parental leave. And that should be ideally having a quota system so that both men and women take an equal amount. And then the third important policy that we had is individual taxation. When you have family-based taxation, there's an incentive for the woman, the second earner, which tends to be the woman, to continue earning less. Yeah. Also, a woman who earns a lot is less attractive on the marriage market as a partner because marrying her won't be as beneficial under a family-based taxation system. So in Sweden, we know or we think of our individual taxation as one of the most important things, policy-wise, that was done in the long run, to build women's career ambitions and career progression from the ground up. Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we've got an analysis of patriarchy at work. We've got culture, norms, stereotypes. We've got inequities of power, leverage, tokenism. We've got the marriage practices. We've got childcare responsibilities. And a lot of this, I would say, is very familiar to me. The solutions are not, the paid care, because a lot of people in the Global South work in the informal economy, but parental leave is not relevant. But the attitudes and the problems that you're describing are extremely familiar. So before we, jump into what we can do about it, I'd like to come back to you, because you didn't speak for very long, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience with the accent, the climate thing that you were doing in Santander, and you brought with you into KPMG. Because what climate change is now doing is adding a whole new layer of difficulty about trade-offs, and we just don't know what the future is going to look like as we try to become more sustainable.
Exactly. So it is something that I'm very passionate about, and is the intersection between climate change and women, and how does women will play a very important role in actually solving climate change and helping that. So we cannot see a world that is sustainable if it's not, obviously, with gender equality, no? And we see examples, thankfully, we see examples from both corporate world and government and public sector where this is actually happening. So, for example, we see more women or more diverse in firms that are actually achieving emissions, CO2 emissions targets faster than those that are run by men. Because they really care about this. They know that this is in order to achieve this, we need to be collaborative. And that's what we are women really good for, no? A collaborative approach, making everybody involved in solving the problem. And that's why we think, obviously, more diverse companies are achieving those type of targets faster. You can see that the same in the government and in the public sector. governments with more diverse ministries or secretaries are actually protecting more their communities, their lands, their oceans, because they really are more worried about biodiversity and how do they include people in the whole than just those that are male dominated. So it's also women are, and equality is needed to achieve a more sustainable world. And it's because we want a sustainable world for everyone, not just for women or men. So I think that's the important thing. We need to get to an equality so that then we can obviously solve the problem for everyone.
Thank you. It's interesting that you talked about the outcomes associated with women being in the executive and important positions. Going back to the Global South, we too see a very special role for women, but for poorer women, because so much of their livelihoods depends on natural resources, on forests, on cattle, on land. So one tends to associate there too that if you had more women speaking, we might take as much care of the planet as they take care of people.
Yeah.
I'd like to come to you because what you outlined, it's quite intangible, this business of how people behave, the norms, etc. So through your work, what sort of interventions, solutions do you think are working? Because you're talking about changing people's mindsets and their cultures.
Yes, yes, there are some types of interventions. What we have, we have worked a lot with this. For example, in terms of stereotypes, in terms of culture, one thing that works, because we have also there is some results in that, is also like awareness. So people many times that don't even realize or don't know they have this bias, they have this unconscious bias, they have a lot of stereotypes, and it's important for them to know, to realize, to understand. So talking about this, but also training, talking about what is good or not, and what are the stereotypes, revealing the stereotypes may be effective. So we see that this may be effective not only in terms of the mindset or preferences or culture, but also in terms of behavior. So when you have, for example, we did very simple, one of the last research that I'm working on, it's a very simple exercise where people are tested on their stereotypes and they give their own answers. And then we with the randomization, we to some people, we randomize this group of managers, so people who are taking responsibility of hiring, promotion, etc. And one group receives this treatment, like information about revealing the stereotypes, knowing what I've done, knowing a little bit about this. And the other group received some other information which has nothing to do with this, and a third group received nothing. And basically they treated, when they have to access, to do a very simple exercise of assessment of CV, like you give them CVs of men and women and you ask them, okay, how do you assess them from 0 to 10, okay? So they are much more gender equal, so they give more, higher grades with respect to those who did not receive any type of intervention, and so were not stimulated in thinking about this possible bias, etc. So basically, in our experiment, this randomized controlled trial that we did, the information treatment closed completely the gap, so it was very strong, okay? So, and this is very simple because basically it costs zero. At the end, very little, like these training programs or just, this awareness or revealing stereotypes. So this is one thing, and it's effective. So they were not biased anymore in the assessment of CV of men versus women. So it's very practical thing. Then, of course, you may think about other type of interventions. So, for example, it is also true that we have this bias against the paternity leave, for example, or even against this many times. I come from south of Europe. Okay, so Italy is a very conservative culture. So, and it's good for us because we do a lot of experiments. It's a kind of laboratory of analysis. But I also try to push the policy because I also work many times when it's possible with companies, with the policymakers, etc. So, for example, with the paternity leave, it's pretty clear that first of all, we don't have the good setting because differently from Sweden, I mean, we only give like 10 days to men, and the rest you can share, yes, but it's not fully paid.
Yeah.
So the part which is not fully paid, of course, men earn always typically more than women, so you don't have an incentive for a man to take it because even for economic reasons, okay? So we need to change this, but then it comes also with a campaign because people, then they have to understand that they can take it and it's not a stigma because we still have the stigma that men taking a paternity leave are, come on, you are, I mean,
a woman.
no? So we have this. We had another example, for example, when we used the flexible work arrangement, which everybody used during the pandemic, like working from home, etc. That was also another story because this is not for women. I mean, this is a very gender neutral thing, but turns out to be that can be good for work-life balance, conflicts, etc. So for women that typically have more this work-life balance. And again, even in this case, there is this stereotype that, come on, if I don't see you there at the office until very late every day, you are doing nothing. So it's kind of, but of course, probably we need to trust each other better, or I don't know, we need to give other incentives for people to be productive. But these are all things that at the end are cultural problems.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You didn't mention one thing that you mentioned earlier, the quota business, but I want to pick that up. And that is in India, they did a natural experiment because the government had quotas for women at the local level. And they found in those villages where there was a woman elected to a leadership position, in those villages, daughters, young girls, started to aspire to education. Parents were more willing to send them to education, and their horizons opened.
Yes.
You know, and this thing of role models, creating role models of, but sympathetic role models, not unachievable role models.
Yes, of course. Yes, but the role models are essential because if you have never seen a woman in that position, come on,
you can't
it's
imagine
very
it.
difficult to think that you will be the first. I mean, someone has to be the first, but the role model works also in the same direction.
Emma?
Yes.
When you were talking, I was reminded, I mean, the costs of being in a fairly influential and leading position in the corporate sector and elsewhere, but let's talk about the corporate. I was thinking very much of that book, Lean In, and I wondered what you thought of the book, because what you were describing are almost like the costs of leaning in.
I have to be very.
Is that an awkward question?
No, I'm not a lean-in fan.
Okay.
Okay, I refuse. Why should I have to lean in? Just ridiculous.
You're leaning now.
So I'm leaning to speak to the microphone.
That's literal.
So look, I have huge respect for Sheryl Sandberg. Amazing. But I truly believe, I really object to, and the whole thing about lean in circles and stuff. Honestly, they shouldn't be needed. It's for me. And look, I know in reality we can say something shouldn't be needed. The trouble is the system is broken. So what do we do to intervene? And again, I'm myself agreeing with everything that Paola's saying. Sort of sitting there nodding. I do believe culture can be changed. I do believe you can change people's attitudes, but you have to actually know you've got to do it, and you've got to try. And the interesting thing, so I led a huge behaviour change program with Deloitte. I was managing partner for talent in the UK for Deloitte from 2013 to 2019. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was actually a corporate finance partner at the same time. It's the usual thing, find a busy woman, give her another job, and she'll do both really well and exhaust herself in the process. Because I also had twin daughters as well, who were 3 years old at that stage. So it was juggling. What we realised, it was really interesting, we were talking earlier about this, so we were having a problem retaining women. Now I apologise that I'm talking in a very binary way when it comes to gender today. It's sort of International Women's Day, and so I apologise about that. One of the other challenges we had back at that stage, that time, is our LGBT plus colleagues wouldn't even share their data with us. So I only had binary data. I basically had, men, women, and that was it. And what we saw was that we were losing women at certain career stages. One of the reasons was work-life balance. We had policies. So why were we losing them? Culture, behaviour, judgment, stigma, assumption. Oh, you've had a baby, you'll want to come back 4 days a week. Oh, and you can't be client serving because you won't be able to be, because you've got your responsibilities at home. I mean, utterly ridiculous. So we had to correct that. And then the other bit with culture was what I call sort of everyday culture, which was the banter, the throwaway comments, those sort of things. And Paola, this is where I 100% agree with you. I truly believe if you want someone's behaviour to change, you have to educate them. And I'm afraid that, I'm 56 and I'm the average age of many of our partners. And so, and I did grow up in a different time and a different environment where I have a very good barometer about what's right and what isn't. But some of my fellow partners didn't understand that making a comment about how, a joke, I was trying to be funny, making a comment about me, about how I looked, about the length of my skirts, whatever it happened to be. And so we decided, right, we have to educate. And we ran 9,000. We put 9,000 people through education, basically. Started with the most senior partners. It cost us nothing. We basically got people in a room and we'd recorded some stories that our people had shared with us. And they were about everybody. And they were just stories where people had not felt included and where they'd felt uncomfortable. And each story had a beginning, middle, and an end. And we literally recorded it on a tape recorder in those days. And it worked. And they were mandatory, those sessions. And my CEO said, you know what, this is not who we are. We're in a really lovely, amazing organisation. I'm hearing these stories. This is not us. This is enough. So guess what? I can only assume this is happening because you don't understand that what you're doing is causing offence. So guess what? We're going to educate you. And we did this whole education session, and that really worked. There were other interventions we had to do, as well as Paola talked about the sort of break down where there was any risk of stereotypes. So we've gone, name blind on CVs, academic institution blind, all of those things. Why do we need to know that? Take it away. And so those things we were able to do as well. And then the final bit was, I don't know if any organisation wants to hit the front page of the FT with a headline that says Deloitte fires 20 partners for inappropriate behaviour. But we did. And when we hit that headline, that was deliberate. My CEO reported that to a journalist because we were dealing with it. And when we became aware, and that inappropriate behaviour, I hasten to add, microaggressions, things that we just, had said, and when it just became, enough, and then you will have to take action. And I don't think enough organisations do that. It has to count. It has to matter. But we also have to start with educating as well.
Well, Emma, you said you've been at Deloitte for quite a while. And I think it would have taken quite a while to have achieved this. You don't have managed to. But let me just say what I think is quite interesting about what you all are saying is that there's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias, right? And what you're talking about, I can't work out if it's conscious or not, but it is about holding up a mirror to people and letting them see themselves in a way that they had not understood, because they saw it as a part of a normal
You are totally right.
way of behaving.
That is exactly, and I believe that, partnerships are very interesting. They're amazing organisations. I'm still there. I love this. I love my firm. There's a reason I'm still there. It'll be the place I end my career, frankly. So, but I think, we're quite hierarchical. There are lots of microcultures, like in any organisation. And if you see somebody not being called out for something, you think, oh, that's okay. And eventually, it's sort of like Stockholm Syndrome. Eventually, it happens. So yeah, it's holding a mirror up, but it's also showing that it counts. So if somebody is brave enough to report something, because that's the other issue is, making people trust enough to report, then you look at it properly. and you deal with it. And the final thing I would say is that, sorry, I just had to add, because we've got a campaign today on International Women's Day called I'm a Woman and the whole purpose is trying to break stereotypes. Yes. And we're featuring a number of common stereotypes. And when you were talking, I was thinking about my one of the really annoying societal ones, which when I'm out with my family and my husband, myself and my 2 kids, guess who is always given the bill in a restaurant? My husband, because apparently he's the only one that can pay for things. It's things like that. And so the last time we were actually in Italy, and I actually very politely said to the waiter, I'm really sorry, but I have a job too. And maybe you could ask who would like to have the bill first. And I just feel I've vowed that I'm going to call out these things now rather than just sitting and taking it.
Yes, thank you. And Johanna, you gave us almost a life course analysis, right? About how we're brought up, what we're brought up to expect. I will tell you this business of women marrying up and men marrying down, there's a name for it in South Asia because it's almost an institutionalized custom. It's called hypergamy. So you marry up, right? Women marry up. And it already builds an authority relationship. But we're talking about Sweden here. And we look to Sweden to sort of, lead the way in many ways. So I find it very interesting that you also talk about incivility and sexual harassment, which is what others on this platform have been talking about. So how does the government of Sweden, you are doing research on this, what is the response of policymakers when you present your findings?
So one response to our research on the consequences for women's careers of this couple formation is that that's nothing that policy can do anything about. So the discussion kind of ends there, which I don't think is true. I think there's certainly, and there's been throughout history, there's been many policy areas where there's been a reluctance, no, that's not the government's role. We can't really put our meddle in that private business. But then the government has still meddled in it and it was fine. And so that's one response. Yeah. But I mean, Sweden, yeah, we have a lot of policies and we have a lot of preconditions for gender equality. But coming back maybe to the role model argument, yes, we can have women in public office, etc. But something that I think is really important in shaping these perceptions is media and just popular culture. Sweden is a small country. We watch Netflix as everybody else. 99% of popular culture comes in as a huge wave of different forms of sexism from abroad, and it's kind of public policy can only do so much. So I think a lot of stereotypes, etc., are formed from popular culture that people consume, and there I think there's another policy area that for Sweden would be very beneficial if other countries could do something about.
Thank you. I think I'm going to come to the last question to all of you and then open up for discussion. We're running a little late, but it is so interesting, and we don't often get such high-powered women talking about the lives they have to lead. One of the things I think is common, and I wish we could find a more imaginative word for education. All of you have, because I was thinking, what can you do about this marital, asymmetry persistent? It's really about bringing children up, to look at a different kind of future. And you talked a lot about education, and you've been talking, but education is such a banal, such an anodyne word, when really you're talking about changing mindsets, changing worlds, So I think that's a challenge to all of you. Please, let's think of a better word than education, which covers everything. But I have one last question, and a quick one, and then we'll take some questions from the floor. And it is the following. So you have done research, you've worked in major corporations. What do you think of the idea of a collaboration? What could we do to promote a collaboration between business and academics? And you're coming from an academic into the...
Is it on? Yeah. I think one aspect that we haven't really touched much today, but I think is really important is how do we bring men with us in this? Because I worked before working in KPMG. I worked in a bank. I worked for Santander for many years. During my time in Santander, I led the Women in Business Network for them. And I had a lot of resistance from my male counterparts saying, why do I need to care about this? But, again, you women trying to get ahead of us. Now, if I'm a 50-year-old white man, it's horrible. I don't get anywhere, you know. So, and in a way, I understand. But I think what we need is to find ways to actually collaborate on this together, because without them, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to bring them as partners in this road, as we do in life. So one of the things that I think it will be really important is to see how we can collaborate, understanding the role of men, helping women get there as well. One of the things that we did in Santander was actually with policy, to do a pilot on how can we incentivize men to take a more equal role in the household. Because that's really, really important, I think, is when you have kids or when you're just married, how do you really, truly have a real partner? It's not that, that you take the coat and then he progresses with his career. It's how do you equal those conditions, and how do you help from your organization to get those equal lives in terms of care responsibilities, the dishes, and also to actually procure for your partner that they also have a career. So I think that's really important. How do we make society equal in all regards, not just in pay?
And it begins at home.
Exactly.
It begins at home. And I think, when I look at, let's talk about research and business collaborations. One thing that research tells me is it's almost like the last frontier. When you talked about taking parental leave in Sweden and the discomfort that men often feel, I have not got to the bottom of why they should feel so uncomfortable. Why is it not possible to take time out to look after kids or do an equal share of housework? And there's something about masculinity and housework that don't seem to go very well.
Yes.
Over to you on business
exactly.
academic collaboration.
Yes, that's this point of the equal sharing at home. We have worked a lot on this. Equal sharing at home has a positive impact on female labor force participation, like working full-time, but also on fertility rate, which is another important part of the story. So we have we have shown this with data. In terms of the collaboration for business, the business community, the business world and academic, I am certainly fan of that. I have launched also in my university a research lab where we collaborate with an insurance company. At the end, it's AXA. So and they invest into research funds, etc. So and we have started this type of collaboration. We also collaborate with other firms because my university is also mainly a business school. In addition with other, I do social and political science, but okay. But the contacts with the firms are very, very strong, and I think this is important because there is a common goal, and the common goal is to have more gender equality, women's leadership position, etc. And this is important also because it does something. It's not only a matter of rights, which are important, okay? We know. We also have the legal studies, we have these people. We know it's a matter of rights, it's a matter of equal rights, but it's also a matter of economic convenience, and we now know this, and the business world also tell us, the community, it's a matter of, it's a good investment. It's a good investment for the country, because we know the countries grow more, develop more when there is gender equality, when there is women's leadership. So there are like some macro effects in terms of simply of GDP or whatever, if women participate to the labor market. But it's also good for companies. We have done a lot of research trying to assess. I mean, it's very complicated to have a causal impact, but there are some studies in that direction that try to understand whether there is a causal impact of the presence of women in leadership position on outcomes like performance and I mean typical outcomes of firms. So it's a good investment. It's something that we can provide. And this is an important part of the story because we go outside, we complement the idea of equal rights, etc., with convenience in economic terms. One important part, I mean, when we go in this aspect, of course, the collaboration with the business world is a win-win for both academia and business. From us, from our point of view, of course, it means that we go into the real world. And I have to say that many times, many colleagues, I mean, even very influential people, just don't like to go into the real world. They just don't like to speak with people, I mean, because they are practitioner or because they want to, I mean, they want to stay far away from the real world, from the business community, but the same with policymakers, okay? So, and I have always had serious issues, I mean, concerns. I never understood why. I mean, these people are doing the right things. So we need to collaborate with them, probably also inform or contribute, but we cannot stay away because otherwise nothing will change. On the other side, it's a win for us. On the other side, it's good also for them because somehow we have like the scientific approach, we can measure, we can evaluate things. I mean, we provide good answers. And it's also true that many times when, let's say, the policymakers, but also the business people, they just don't follow the scientific approach, I mean, there will be kind of unpredictable outcome. We don't know what will happen. So I think it's win-win.
It's a win-win, yes. Emma?
I'm a big fan of collaboration. So I'm a big fan of collaboration business to business. You know, we have this amazing collaboration called, it's a very long name, the Global Business Collaboration for Better Workplace Mental Health, GBC. We're really proud of that. So we collaborate with, you know, like HSBC, Unilever. It's 10 companies that really care, that actually really care about this, and that want other business leaders to take action and make it a priority. And so that's on the mental health side. For us, that's really important. But we collaborate with other organisations as well, and other aspects of our inclusion strategy. Academic, so collaborating with academia, I think is really important, and I think it goes both ways. So I do a lot of going in and talking to MBA students, where I get asked in to go and talk about how did I, in reality, bring about change? What, you know, how do I do my job? What are the challenges? And I always say yes to those because, you know, it gives someone a chance. You know, if I can give a bit back, give something back. But at the same time, I think we are really good to experiment on. Couldn't think of how else to phrase that. I think where we struggle a bit, so certainly from a mental health perspective, is that the level of the sort of trials that people want to do, we just can't do. So we can't do the sort of randomized, and that's really difficult. And I think that's a stereotype, an assumption that gets made the minute you think about research and academic research. So I'm actually really interested after this in talking to both of you because so I do think there's a lot more we could do. I think it's you know, we as organisations, look, we do tend to know what our problems are. I do believe we do. The problem, and I think we often scrape around for solutions that are easy, and actually what we need is to really do the difficult stuff, and I think academic rigour behind that can only help. So I'm really supportive of that as well.
Good.
Yeah,
You're an academic. Yes. Okay, so I think I'm going to open it up to questions, and just put up your hands, and I'll point at you, and gives you name and who you are. And there's one already.
Yes, my name is Sonia.
Is there a microphone?
Very close friend of this lovely lady. And at the moment, I'm just a mother of 3 girls. And I was listening to you, and I was thinking what a fantastic world would be for women, no? To be able to have actually gender equality. And in my daughter's school, there are so many talks about gender equality. But I think we have failed, and probably women too, in not pushing the society and the institutions to prepare the boys, because it's impossible for women to do everything. So I think the message for women is already there. We want to be strong, we know we have the right, we know we can do it, but we cannot be expected to do everything. So if you ask the boys in my daughter's class, are you okay with the girls, with me being a career woman, they will say, yes, go for it. But then if you ask them, and what are your expectations when you come home? That's another question. So I think there should be like educational programs going in the schools. It's very simple, as in the same way there are so many sexual programs going on at the moment, and really explained what is gender equality. It's not about women going to work. It's about, there is another side of the coin, and everything has to work. This is a puzzle, and at the moment there is a very, very big missing piece in the puzzle, and it's not working. So that's probably why we are seeing so many women struggling so much to have everything. But I don't see the message going to the boys. I don't see any message going to that way, in the sense, if women have to be working or they want to work, we have to be prepared to share. And I don't see that going, the message going there. So I really feel sorry for my daughters, because if we don't give the boys this message, I don't think we're going to end up with inequality. That's
No. one little gleam of, optimism or hope is that, again, the studies that we look at, sometimes they do tell us that boys who were brought up by feminist working mothers tend to be more open to sharing and are better men.
I'll tell them to look for that.
Tell them to look.
Ask them what about their moms.
Yeah. So, yes? Could you tell us who you are?
Hi everyone, my name is Tanya. I was actually one of Paola's students last year, and I'm now at LSE doing EIPP. Anyways, my question concerns labor market institutions. So you've been mentioning how there is an unequal division of work within the household, and mainly that's been driving also statistical discrimination towards women. So people expect women to perform worse than men because they have less time to dedicate to work. And I was wondering if you think that labor market institutions such as very long working hours and the expectations of everyone putting in very long working hours is actually disadvantaging women, and if changing that could allow for a more equal world, or if it was, as if it was mentioned before, actually lower working hours are not lowering the amount of work, and therefore it would not be a feasible solution.
We'll take that question, but let's see if there's a couple more and then come back to the panel. Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Vanda. I was actually a student, an ILA student in the social policy department. And my question was more regarding the sustainability of female leadership in organizations. Because I was thinking that due to the stereotypes that are current in the workplace, often women leaders are judged for their gender, not for their actions. So if a woman leader is a bad leader, then is judged as a woman, not as a leader. So I was just going to ask, what do you think of this, and what steps we can take to address this challenge?
Thank you. And over here? We'll take 3 and come back to you.
So first, thank you very much for the discussion. It was really interesting. My question, it's a question for all of you, but it's in 2 parts, let's say. First, we talk a lot about gender equalities in firms, and we also talk about sustainability and climate change. Are companies and policymakers really ready, in the sense that, are you still feeling that a lot of this and the policies are feminist washing, or greenwashing? Or is it finally happening? Are we really changing things, and are leaders in policymakers, I mean, leader in the government and in companies really ready to make the real change and not just to communicate about that. And of course, you mentioned a lot of good examples, but I want an optimism, some optimism. Thank you.
Let's ask the panel. Johanna, would you like to start? Take any of the questions you want.
Yes, I really want to agree with the first speaker. Focusing on what men can gain from gender equality is going to be important. You know, men can gain meaningful relationships with other human beings, their children first and foremost. This is like a human value that men can really gain from at like a very fundamental level. And I think in Sweden we are moving in that direction, because maybe first when paternity leave came, there was like a social shame among men, but now I really don't think that's there anymore. You know, it's very natural for men to take parental leave now. So it's possible for men to kind of develop maybe more of a like expanding the male gender norm to gain things, not only by like the meaningful interpersonal relationships with other people like their children, also like the hyper masculine work culture that's giving rise to this like sexist work culture. Men don't necessarily appreciate that. You know, we see in our Swedish data on how people think about their work environment, like neither men nor women appreciate a male-dominated work environment. Like the more men there is, the less men like the work environment also. You know, men also don't like the toxic masculinity, blah, blah. Not men, like men don't feel comfortable in that. So yeah, they can gain in many ways. And I really agree that like that needs to be a bigger part of the discussion. And yeah, so
Emma?
So just a couple of comments. So the first comment again, look, I do have a bit of hope. And I do think it's what, you know, as I see many of my friends that are working mothers, working parents of sons, I do see a difference in the attitude. I grew up in a very traditional, and my mum didn't work. My mum actually was extremely resentful about the fact that she gave up a career for us. It was like this forever in our ears about it, which possibly is what's made me, you know, drive my own life the way that I have. But I do have hope, and when I look amongst my friend group, and you know, I was talking with my friends the other day. I think mental load is the other thing. I think is a really big thing. And you know, example of conversation with my husband last week when I was literally at the point of I just can't do it, and he said, just tell me what to do. I was like, why do I have to tell you what to do? You are a parent too. So guess what? And so and a friend of mine said, you know what you've got to do? You are going to have to tell him, but you tell him once and you put it on a list and then it's his responsibility. And she's done that with her husband and it's worked. And she said, look, he doesn't do it as well as I would. Actually, I'm such a perfectionist. I would assume that nobody can do anything as well as me. But ultimately, he does it. And so I think so to me, there's sort of education in the home, there's role modelling in the home, there's a whole educational mental load as well. And then the only other point I wanted to make was on the working hours question, which I don't think this is about gender anymore. I think this is about people. And our millennials and Generation Z research, and I appreciate many of you are those people, so I apologise for quoting research at you on, you know, the demographic that you all fit into. But ultimately, it's really clear that, and this is down to you as well. So when you're going out into the workplace, when, you know, with your expectations of what you demand, do not settle for what I did. Do not work 18 hours a day and think it's normal and sacrifice things. Do not do it. And all the research shows us that you're not going to do that and that you are going to stand for things like purpose. And I think, you know, I know it's all very well for me to sit here as a very senior person and say that, and you'll be starting your careers, but I genuinely, that's why we publish research like we do. And that's why we talk about it a lot. And we say, you will not attract the best talent unless you actually recognise mental health, so you are the best talent. So you have to also reinforce that as well, because that's how we're going to change it. It's not just women. It's all genders. It's really important.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's very important, this part, because it is true, and we know that even when women work and have their own careers, they still have the control of everything happening at home, in the household, with children, etc. That's the problem, because at the end, I mean, you cannot do everything, okay? So the division of labor is particularly relevant in this sharing, but it is also true that new generations are different. I mean, new people, they don't just, they ask for flexibility, for example. That's a very, very high request. Not only women, also men, like working a distance from home, not staying there until late. So we see this change. And I think this is a very important part of the story. Another important, so it goes also in terms of, you know, the number of hours worked that we said before, because of course, if we need a different organization of work, we need a different organization, very different from what we experience, okay, which we don't even notice, but I mean, working full time every day, weekend, etc. It's not going to work. But the good part of the story is that this is not going to work also for men. So it can change from their side probably. In terms of the greenwashing and this part, yeah, so the feminist washing or whatever, are we ready? I don't know. I think that certainly it is important to put the thing in the way that I said before, like, this is convenient for everybody, okay? So if you believe it or not, in any case, if you see the gain, if you see that, come on, it's a gain of attraction of talent, it's a gain of retention of talent for firms, for example. These are the big challenges, okay? How to attract talents, how to retain them. And so if you see the gain, then you probably start to be convinced also that that's a good thing. Whatever it's your bias or your a priori, but you need to see this like a gain. Otherwise, it's really, yes, okay, I have to comply with this rule, I have to comply with the other, let's do this training program, let's do this other thing, let's appoint this woman there because so everybody is happy. Yeah, so the problem is that you really need to see the gain, and so we have this responsibility somehow. And this is also why, unfortunately, I mean, our generation, we still have to work a lot because we cannot say no, because we have somehow this responsibility. But I think this is also going to change a little bit in the future when this becomes more common. Because if they see the gain, they really go in that direction. And then when there is enough women, because we need a critical mass, we need to be, I mean, cannot be just one woman. Then when there is more women around and there is more gender balance, then things will probably change automatically, okay? But we are still in this phase where it is important that the numbers change.
But you know, the very fact that we're having this conversation,
yes,
is indicative of progress. You know, because we wouldn't be having this conversation, let us say, 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Not this conversation.
But I think, to your point around seeing the gain, I think, and maybe it's because I always like to see things with optimism, I think we are ready, because not just because it's the right thing to do, to be more sustainable, to bring more women to the table, but it means that it makes business sense. So it really, for the companies, is a positive, makes their earnings look better. And it's plenty of research that you may already have read. Those companies that are more diverse, that have a better score in the ESG terms, environmental, social, and governance, they perform better. So it makes business case. At the end of the day, sadly, this world is moved by the money as well. So it's not just, obviously, is it the right thing to do, but it's also good for your shareholders. So at the end, there's win-win, and that's the thing at the end. And that's one of the things that I learned through my career. Always make it as a business case. Always think about it in the way that is going to benefit your shareholders. And for our kids, I think that's what we need to tell them. Look at this from a perspective that you're going to be marrying someone. It's going to be kind of your shareholder. Make it more equal for you as well. That's what I try to teach my daughter as well. Like, get a very handsome partner, but also one that is going to be really equal with you and make delicious.
business case actually operates at the worker level as well. So I've been associated with something called the Better Works program, which is run by the ILO. And one of the things it tries to do is to get managers in garment firms, you know, the global value chain in garments, to treat their workers better. And one of the things that they want to try and do is reduce levels of sexual harassment. And it doesn't work evenly. You know, in some countries, the cultures might be different. But one country where it did work was Vietnam. And one of the results of reducing levels of sexual harassment was lower turnover. That workers did not leave after a very short time. You know, so that business case can work in all sorts of, you know, at the top and also at the bottom. Any other questions from our audience? Yes.
Just wanted to follow up on something really important. That was mentioned by both Emma and Begoña, because I think it's really crucial for driving positive change. So we've talked about the importance of bringing men in as allies and really drive change together. Begoña, but you mentioned that when you implemented this change in Santander, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it, you got a lot of backlash. Emma mentioned that 20 high partners in Deloitte were fired, possibly because of the resistance. So I guess my question is, was there backlash, and how did you deal with that in your organizations? Did you measure it? Yeah, if you can take a little bit.
I saw someone else.
Yeah, we needed to also take one.
Yes, okay.
We didn't answer one of the questions on that.
You can come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back. Yes.
Mine is just a quick one. So you have been working on gender. Sorry, my name is Marina. I'm from Spain, and I'm here with my friend Vanda, who studied at LSE. But yeah, it's just a quick question. So you've been working on this for a number of years, and probably you saw some gains, but also setbacks. And like, I guess there's days when you get really frustrated and you see things going nowhere. So yeah, it was just if you could give some advice or like how you handle that on a more daily, personal basis, also for activism, not only within business. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Is there one more? Okay, over there.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm currently visiting at KCL, so across the street. So my question really draws back to the statistic that you mentioned at the very beginning, that I think it was 94% of women seek more flexible working hours, some sort of leave accommodations, but they're too afraid to ask for it because they fear they will be penalized. Is there any research being done, like also on the employer side, so what these statistics actually are? So do they know about this, how big the issue actually is? So maybe if there was evidence that it's not that big of a deal, or that employers were taking active steps to encourage this, you may be able to hold people or make it more sustainable. So I was wondering how nowadays organizations are dealing with this, like it has to be a topic after COVID.
You wanted to answer an earlier question than this one.
The sustainability of women leadership, that's something that I really love. So one thing that we and hopefully this generation doesn't do it, but that we have training to do, because that's what we saw as we grew up professionally, was to act like men do, a bit more aggressive, more authoritative. So, and I think that's a mistake. And if you see a lot of and I'm not saying that all men are like this, I'm just saying that the stereotype was that, one of like alpha macho, and then it was copied to some of the women. Now, what we are trying to, what I'm trying to change when I'm in my organizations is actually saying this is not the way that I want to be as a leader. I want to be a leader that includes people, that brings people with her, that teaches the way that collaboration, listening to people, giving people opportunities, the way to get there, not by imposing or being authoritative. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be really, really conscious when you grow up in your organization and as you enter in the workplace. You really need to talk, to walk your talk, to really show your values and stand upon that. Like, be ready to face some criticism. Be ready to face people saying, "Oh God, she's a go-getter." Yeah, you are a go-getter, but you also bring people with you. You have your idea, so go and do it that way. Be truthful to yourself. Not try to copy a behavior of someone, a man, because they got there. Just do not compromise and not being yourself. And for me, we all women need to help each other. And I heard someone that that I will never forget. She said there's a special place in hell for women that in our choice. And that's so true. We need to really help ourselves as well to get there and to sustain this leadership and do not never compromise on yourself. Sorry about the wishy-washy, but I think that's what I really
Yes.
Go with one.
Yes, it's true. I think they know better than us probably what the firms know about the request of flexibility in terms of new workers. But for our research, we know that this is a point that the firms understand. I mean, they realize, and actually it's a way to attract people and to retain talents to work on this. I mean, they know, okay? They know, and actually, and it's not a female thing. That's the important part of the story, because it certainly helps women in at the status quo for where we are, but it has nothing to do with gender issues. I mean, this is for life, for life of everybody. For work-life balance is not necessarily something for women. So of course we have to move from where we are in order to understand this. So I think this is an important part. In terms of leadership, I also would like to suggest that, of course, the style of leadership is different for men and women. So we are not talking about women doing exactly the same thing as men, but it's a completely different traits and style and inclusion and caring about diversity, about inclusion, about different style. But it's also true that, and we see this also in research, that this can emerge when we have many women there, okay, in leadership position. If you only have one, it's very difficult. She is going to adapt. We know this also from our studies for quotas. I have studied for many years the introduction of board gender quotas. So there are women in boards of directors because of quotas, okay, and they were not there before. And of course, if you only put one woman, I mean, it's very difficult that she can really contribute to change things. But if you start having 2, 3, or 4, although they are not equal number, then you see the difference also in what they do, in the style, in the type of leadership, in the type of conversation, in the discussion, in the points that are raised, in the agenda. So that are the beneficial effects, because the beneficial effects go outside the simple, the descriptive representation, but you have to go into substantive. So you have to go into also into facts. So I think this is also an important part of the story. I'm not going to answer about what we do in the daily life, because I mean, we are simply struggling. I think, at least I am struggling, but I don't know.
Yes, I know that I think it was Sweden that introduced the idea of the critical mass in politics, that you have to have about at least 30% to be able to feel comfortable to make a change. Was it Sweden? No.
Maybe, but I think in political science, the critical mass theory has not received so much support. Or at least, some people are thinking that.
But there is a point about if there's just one of you.
Sure, but that there's a specific discontinuity. Yeah, an increase, I would agree, but that there would be we need this much, then it everything flips.
No.
Yeah,
not the precise number,
which is the idea of
it's that you cannot be alone.
But I also think, we did a study on this, and one of the things is, of course, women come into parliament through very many different routes. In some cases, they're nominated by a ruling party. In some cases, it's a sort of a quota. In some cases, they come in through the general elections. And when they come in through a general election, they have a constituency to whom they're accountable. And that makes a kind of, so how that critical mass is constituted, I think, also makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, so we always talked, about the power of 3. And I was on a leadership team with 4 women, and actually you did feel solidarity. You would look across the room. There'd be those moments where you would look across and you would feel as though that was you had a bit of power there. So for me, that's an important thing. Just to pick up, so a couple of things. So the backlash question. Do you know, I didn't make it. What we made this about was about a respectful workplace. So I used the word respect and inclusion a lot. I didn't use the word diversity, actually deliberately, because I wanted this to be about a human expectation that we all had of a respectful and inclusive workplace, whoever we are. It doesn't matter, how you identify, you all deserve to be treated with respect. And so people couldn't really argue with that, because people couldn't really say, well, actually, no, I don't believe people should be treated with respect. Yes. So, and I remember having a conversation with somebody that, we were talking about a development program where we were really hoping a lot of women would take part. And I remember this whole conversation actually with some women that were saying, oh, this feels really uncomfortable. I remember a male colleague who was amazing just turned around and said, are you really complaining about something that will help us level the playing field? And I used to use that sort of all the time, was, are you really complaining? Are you really saying that we don't want a level playing field? So those things, greatly helped. The other thing that greatly helps, and this comes back to the flexible working comment or question, we actually costed out the cost of replacement in one financial year of everybody that we had lost to work-life balance and culture. Okay? And we did when I say everyone, it was only managers and senior managers. It was £68 million. Okay, that's. I mean, we're a huge business, I hasten to add. So, but that number I threw out for everything. And we did do a huge project on what we called agile working. We didn't call it flexible working, because the minute I mentioned about flexible working, everyone glazed over and thought, hey, it's these women, they're really difficult, they have babies, blah, blah. And so we called it agile, and we actually reframed it and rebranded it effectively, which really helped, because it took the stereotype, we gave it a different name, and it took those entrenched assumptions, biases, really helped to take that away. And when I came out of my role, I costed out the benefit, because I was like, oh, have we saved ourselves? This whole business case thing. And yeah, it was near enough. We saved ourselves £68 million a year by doing what we did. So the benefit from our perspective was very clear. The only other thing I'd say is, in the Women at Work research, we actually have identified a link. So we've identified a very small number of women that work for companies that are getting it right. And part of that is a real flexibility point, and we're able to demonstrate it in how long they're going to stay, in retention, all of those things. So I don't think there's enough research being done. King's actually, the Julia Gillard Institute, who I do stuff with, and we do quite a lot with them. They've done and they are doing, I think, some really interesting research around flexible working. So it's really worth checking that out as well.
Okay, so let me jump into the personal frustrations of maybe a joint answer with the other question about whether women are evaluated as women, and is that a problem? And I think that's certainly true. Women get worse performance evaluations because they're women, their errors at work are judged more harshly. Maybe what they do, that's good. Their good performance at work is judged as less good, and there are these behaviors we talked about in terms of invalidations, etc. So I think yes, all those things are very important, and you get frustrated by seeing those. Also in academia, I'm sure in business, you see them happening around you, and that makes you sad. But also it can be good, because when something like that happens to you, you know that it's not you that's the problem. So if I'm at a conference and I walk up to a group, they're asking questions to someone, I stand there, then I ask my question, and 3 men walk away. Yeah, that's a sign that my question wasn't important enough to stand around and listen to. Okay, that happens often. And I see it happening to other women all the time. It's just one of many examples, but now I can kind of spot it, and I'm yeah, it wasn't because my question was necessarily bad. This is part of this behavior. So once we know these things are going on, I think as women too, we can think, or we can encourage each other and be like, it's not you. We can think that about ourselves. So that's a little bit how I try to deal with it personally. Yeah.
I think it's quite old research, but the research I think, but pardon?
Oh.
Yeah, can I ask a final
Sure,
question?
go ahead.
So, thank you. Is it on? Yeah. So my question is more than a question, is a suggestion. I'm still working. I am also a mother of 3 children, but I had to give up a lot of my career to follow my husband. So I have managed to find what I would find an acceptable balance for myself, but many of my colleagues would not find this an acceptable balance. And one of the things I have discovered is that, in my view, one of the reasons we are having difficulties to fit in the women needs into the corporate world is because the assessment is made by men. And the reasons why we are assessing people are still men-driven. The many values that we bring into a team in terms of collaboration, sustainability, making connections, ability, adaptability, flexibility, all those assessments that we traditionally don't make, also as women when we assess a curriculum when we have to hire our colleagues, when we need to give them an opportunity, that's not valued. So ourselves, we think there's only a way up. We never think there's a sideways to one side that also has a value. So I think as women, I think part of the education we need to make in the corporate world is we need to educate men that there are other values that we may bring that should be valued at least as much as the values they have been traditionally using to measure people. And I don't think we do this on a regular basis. I'm struggling to do it in my own teams, and obviously I also have to make my business case. Is extremely challenging. And I think if we would be able to show that value, we would be breaking probably not the glass ceiling, but we would be breaking the glass wall that we have to one side to the other. And that is as valued as it is to go all the way up the ladder. If this is sufficient for you as a woman, if you think you are having a professional life and you're having the right balance, I think that's useful. So I think those discussions, in my experience, they are not being fostered in, I don't know, at academia. I don't have any experience, but at least not in the corporate world. So let's define as women what are the values we can bring, and let's make an effort to assess people on those values as well. And once we can prove that, in my view, once we can really prove that and prove the value proposition, I think we will be much more successful.
Is there anyone up for an academia research on valuing all the intangibles?
Well, I'll tell you what, academia tells you that students systematically rate female teachers, female lecturers, less highly. Yes.
No, but it's completely true, and we see it in the workplace. And I read a book that Almudena recommended to me, which is the Say No Club, which is around doing non-promotable tasks. And usually those non-promotable tasks are around building a team, caring for others, be collaborative, because nobody really takes them into account into your scorecard, into your performance. So it's true that as a corporate world, we need to do a lot to actually start thinking around not just the what and what you have delivered in terms of pounds or X. It's around how you have delivered that, and then also bringing all the other intangible aspects that are really critical for a company success. Because without people, there's nothing, isn't it? Especially in consultancy firms, our asset is our people. If we don't take care of them, there's no firm, no business.
And women are substantially better at that than many in my experience. Yeah, substantially better.
But the problem is, though, the women take on more of it. So, I mean, even in the room earlier when we were talking, and it was like, I'm doing this and this and this and this. Yeah. And if you think about what the thises are, they're typically things that are, what would it have been described as the softer things versus anything else. And that you're right about what's rewardable, what isn't. I think my own organisation, I do think we're we're a lot more in that direction. There's an amazing book Kathy Benko wrote, as a former partner, about the career lattice, where she talks about why can't we go sideways? Why can't we then go this way and then go that way? And why does everything have to be linear? And I think that, that book is super interesting. And I think as there's more of a skills-based model you're seeing in the workforce now, so look, I have a bit more hope. My other hope is I genuinely, it's organisations that are led by women, teams that are led by women. In my own experience, it is more valued. Those things are more valued. That's just the reality. When I have friends that are working for, very strong women leaders, you see the progression, you see those things being valued, and it's catch-22. But we need, as we get more women into those leadership roles, I do believe that we will start to see things change as well.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time. I think that was a really fascinating discussion. Not a conversation I often have a chance to hear, so I really enjoyed it. And I, for one, really believe in this academic business collaboration, because I think we really need to study business. And some of this everyday incivility, etc. I think it needs to be surfaced and made available for everyone to see, and everyone to have that mirror held up. Anyway, so thank you to all the speakers, and I'd like to invite you all to a nice reception at the atrium. And who will lead us there?